It is Monday, April 16th, 2018, and this is the Monday Morning Analyst. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I'm the host of this program. I very much appreciate you guys joining me here. Okay, so what are we going to get to today? Well, over the weekend, there was a great Bellator event that not a whole lot of people saw, I think, but most of you probably should have seen the main event for UFC on Fox 29, otherwise known as UFC Glendale, because in that main event, Dustin Poirier had, in my judgment, probably the best win of his career over Justin Gaethje. Now, what's interesting about that fight is, number one, it was probably a contender for Fight of the Year. There might even be a couple of rounds in there that are for Rounds of the Year contender as well, but that's not what I want to discuss today. Something different occurred to me over the weekend. Justin Gaethje had a great fight against Michael Johnson. He had a great fight against Eddie Alvarez. He had a great fight against Dustin Poirier, but he came perilously close to losing the Johnson fight. He did lose the Alvarez fight, and of course he did lose the Poirier fight. Now, this is not to say that he's somehow not an elite fighter or not worthy of our admiration. Far from it. He has, in my judgment, sacrificed more on the altar willingly of athletic, competitive, high-level glory than just about anyone else ever in mixed martial arts. We have a ton of respect for him at MMA fighting, and me personally as well. But it does occur to me, though, that there might be something up with those losses. Now, we all know that his style has a lot of costs to it, has a lot of benefits to it. But the question I was pondering was, has the Justin Gaethje code been cracked? Have people figured out how to beat him? And the answer is no, but maybe also kind of yes. Now, I understand that may be a little bit confusing, so let's dig into the details. All right, first things first, what do the statistics of this fight tell us? The answer is maybe not a whole lot. Somebody with more savvy about advanced mathematics could maybe look at this and say something about it. The only thing I want to say is Justin Gaethje is one of the few fighters who actually, at this level anyway, absorbs more strikes than they dish out per fight. That's a little bit unusual, and if you look at his historical norms and then you actually do the math, he absorbed more than he landed in this fight, which is common for him. But here's my point. Relative to how much he normally absorbs on average, he absorbed more than that. And relative to what he dishes out, according to his historical numbers, he actually dished out less than that. So it still had the same pattern of taking more than giving, but he took more than normal and he dished out less than normal. Of course, that's never a great recipe for success. But beyond that, the math doesn't really tell us a whole lot. So that's not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on was, okay, he did beat Michael Johnson fair and square. And maybe if you went and looked at that fight, we could draw an even bigger pattern. But I went back and I watched the Alvarez fight. And I was saying to myself, okay, why did Eddie win? And was there anything that Dustin Poirier could take from that? And the answer is yes and no. In other words, there were some things that do overlap, and there were some things that don't overlap at all. But I guess I want to start with the Alvarez fight, then we'll look at the Poirier fight and see what commonalities are there and what differences are there. Now, you guys know my method. I like to look at the finish and say to myself, okay, if this happened at this moment in this round, did it happen at any point prior in the fight? And if so, can we detect a pattern? And the answer with both this fight in Alvarez and as we're going to see in a minute against Poirier, yes, there in fact is a pattern. Very commonly there is one. That's not an unusual thing, but there is definitely one in Alvarez and Poirier with Justin Gaethje. Now, there was a lot of reasons why Eddie Alvarez won, and a lot of things that Eddie Alvarez did that we just can't get into. You know, they're both those. He has, for example, good footwork, stayed off the fence, a lot of L stepping. By the way, he did some darting, which I'm going to put up here. He did that a bunch in this fight, particularly in the second round. And what I have for you to start is now let's look at that finish. And in the finish, it really tells the entire story of the fight. How did Eddie Alvarez win? When you go back and you watch the contest, which we're going to in just a minute, at least the relevant parts of it, what you find out is that Eddie Alvarez did a ton of body work. He went to the body a lot. He would initiate the clinch. He would hang on the neck of Justin Gaethje, really pulling him down, going to work with the body, and then, of course, throwing knees to the body as well. This knee to the chin that ultimately finished him was a bit aberrant, so probably Justin Gaethje was not expecting it. That was really the method here. Footwork, staying off the fence, disrupting him with his rhythm, disrupting him with his jab, using his jab at the end of combinations, right? So he was doing all kinds of things. But the big main reason was body work, and then hanging in the clinch. Now, why is that relevant? Well, let's take a look at some of the other fight footage and begin to piece together a narrative. So here's round 2 and all of the work that Eddie Alvarez did with Justin Gaethje. Now, what do you notice about Eddie Alvarez? I mentioned the darting. You're going to see some of that here. I mentioned a lot of the footwork. You'll see that going side to side, in and out, staying off the cage, using a lot of fakes, a lot of feints, changing rhythm. You could see him level changing, all kinds of stuff that he's doing. And all of that is part of the story. But the big one that I want to focus in on, of course, is the body work that he was doing. And what can we say about the body work? It was heavy. It was constant. I know that Justin Gaethje said he corrected for that in training against Dustin Poirier, but just there was this relentless pursuit against the body. On top of that, as I mentioned, you see him hanging on the back of the neck a lot of dirty boxing in this fight that a lot of people didn't notice. Now, why was he able to go to the body so often? And why was he able to dirty box so effectively in the way that he was? Again, that's not the sum total of his offense, but they're big key components. It's the shelling of Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje does a lot of this. He shells a lot. And he does a lot of rampage rolling. Well, he'll shell, roll, and then come out on top. You see that a lot too. But he shells a lot. We talked about Yoel Romero having sort of one-way offense and one-way defense. He just parries, blocks, and then explodes. Justin Gaethje isn't exactly that way, but he does have these prolonged periods where he is shelling during the course of a fight. That makes him a little bit hard to hit. You can hit him with uppercuts, which you see Eddie throw. You can hit him with hooks, which you see Eddie throw. You can jab, hook around each side, and then finish with an uppercut and then a kick. There's all different kinds of combinations you can work. But the shelling, he just kind of stays in position there a little bit, even if he's rolling a little bit side to side. That means the body is wide open. That means he's going to have a hard time seeing. That means his feet are probably not going to be all that much in motion. And that means if you're shelling, you're probably already going to have a bent posture. So Eddie took advantage of all those things and went after the body relentlessly, hung on the back of the neck, fired up dirty boxing over and over and over and over again. Now, yes, he had to endure an onslaught of leg kicks. He had to endure Justin Gaethje's own hand combinations, his own jabs at times, right? This relentless pressure. He had to do all those kinds of things. And Eddie Alvarez told me on Friday that one of the key considerations was they had to stay in the pocket because as you come in and as you come out, you're going to get torn up with leg kicks. And in fact, Justin Gaethje did fire leg kicks all the time. One of the key considerations here, though, and what you're going to see in the Poirier fight's a little bit different, Eddie Alvarez is standing orthodox. He does a little bit of stance switching, but not really a whole lot in this fight. Really, most of it takes place from the orthodox position. That means Justin Gaethje also in the orthodox position. So why is that relevant? In the Justin Gaethje-Eddie Alvarez fight, Justin Gaethje almost never throws with his left leg. Everything is from that right side. Well, you're facing an opponent who's got the same kind of stance you do, which means he's attacking the outside lead leg of Eddie Alvarez because he's swinging back from the right. Okay? Eddie did not try to counter that at all. He tried to wrestle or catch the leg, but not much. The real bulk of his offense came from footwork, clinch, body. That's really where it all, overwhelming majority. He never really had any effective answer for that kick. And how could he? Yes, you can fire a shot sometimes from the same side. Sometimes you can fire from the opposite side, depending on the stance of the combination. But Eddie never really challenged it. He just kind of ate it. Again, switch stance a little bit, either to relieve himself or give a bit of a different look to Justin Gaethje. But that was not what he homed in on. What he homed in on was, if I can fake, if I can feint, if I can level change, if I can stay in the pocket, and I can throw punches, I can get Justin Gaethje to shell. And if he shells, I can go to the body. To some extent, you'll see Eddie chop his legs. From the outside, he was able to dart and create angles. By the way, both of these guys are really good about punching and then turning a corner. That was his method to victory. And he did it long enough and successfully enough that by the time that third round came around, very, very end of it, by the way, you could see him go to the body, resist the clinch on Justin's terms, reestablish it after going to the body one more time, and then, of course, firing that knee up the top. That's a very basic and broad overview of how Eddie Alvarez beat Justin Gaethje from the orthodox position, but that's not at all what Dustin Poirier did. Dustin Poirier fought from the southpaw position and had a totally different strategy. So how was he able to beat Justin Gaethje? Let's take a look. This is what I found so intriguing. You all just saw, again, a real basic, broad overview of how Eddie Alvarez beat Justin Gaethje. Dustin Poirier did some of the same things, as I mentioned. Good footwork. Now, he did get trapped against the fence for a brief period, I believe, in that third round. So that part wasn't so great. But for the most part, you can see he's working on his footwork. He's going side to side. He's L-stepping. He's trying to disrupt with the jab. Some of that stuff was basically the same. But again, the real key moments of offense didn't necessarily come from that. That stuff matters. Don't misunderstand me. But the big work, that really wasn't what it was. Yes, Dustin Poirier went to the body as well. But while Eddie was standing this way, Dustin was standing this way, and that changed everything because you got different leg kick attacks and different leg kick options as a consequence. Now let's look at the finish here, and what does it really show you? You're going to see some evasive maneuvering from Dustin. You're going to see him key off of the jab of Justin Gaethje. Justin kind of paused twice, and then brilliant timing from Dustin. He fires his own jab over the top and catches him clean. But then what you're going to notice is, and this is really the whole story of the fight, or at least the big narrative of the fight, you're going to see that Justin Gaethje tries to parry a shot and then throw a leg kick from that opposite stance. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because that is what Poirier used basically the entire fight to not merely set up the finish, but to do the majority of his major offense. Here is what Dustin Poirier did. While Eddie Alvarez from the orthodox position stood there and used fakes, feints, and a lot of other attacks, footwork, the whole nine, to set up shelling on Justin Gaethje and then go after him and then hang on the clinch, all the stuff we discussed, Dustin Poirier had a bit of a different idea. Yes, he wanted to keep his back off the fence. Yes, he wanted to work his jab. Okay, some commonalities there. But from this position, he wanted to use the rear leg kick to go after him. Right? He wanted to use that any time he got hit, he wanted to fire something back. And there were varying degrees of success there. And by the way, Justin Gaethje had his own changes. He, by the way, in the Alvarez fight, only threw that rear leg. In the Poirier fight, he was throwing the front leg, sometimes to disrupt the jab of Dustin Poirier, very successfully to a certain extent. So I will say that Justin Gaethje deserves some credit for adding some tools, but you see this finish, and you can see it. I put up here in slow motion as well. You can go through and watch it yourself. Times the jab, pops it. Well, I should say from this side. Times the jab, pops it, right? And then as he tries to throw the kick, and there's almost this delayed reaction. He doesn't just throw that left over the top, Dustin Poirier. He kind of fades with... he fades with the right just a little bit, and then the timing is just a little bit different for Justin Gaethje. Plus his defense was down, and he gets hit with this tsunami of a left hand. And then, of course, you can see Justin Gaethje wave him in like this at the end, which is just crazy. It speaks to what an animal he is. But a very different approach because he had a very different stance and very different options, even if there are some commonalities. So you saw the Alvarez finish, and then we watched what happened in that second round, which was a good round for him. Let's go back and look at the first round now for Dustin Poirier and see what that tells us. Now, I've cobbled together not every single moment of offense from that first round between Poirier and Gaethje, but the real substantive stuff. And as I mentioned, if someone asked me, are there commonalities between Alvarez and Poirier? Yes, there are some commonalities. The use of the jab, footwork, all the things I mentioned over and over again. All those things are similar, and all those things definitely matter, right? But the big offense was not that way at all. Where Eddie Alvarez from the orthodox position was willing to take those leg kicks, Dustin Poirier, yes, he might have taken them, but he was firing offense back, and not just one shot with the left over the top. He was going into him constantly and throwing 3, 4, 5, 6 strike combinations. Also, what do you notice from Dustin Poirier as he pursues Justin Gaethje? Gaethje begins to shell. That opened up some body work for Dustin Poirier, although he typically preferred to jab, jab, hook, hook, or hook, jab, or hook, uppercut, and then reset the angle. He had a bit of a slightly different approach there, but nevertheless, pouring on offense all the time, never letting him ever throw a kick and just get away with it. Of course, a couple of those did sneak through without any kind of answer, but the big approach from Dustin Poirier was, I know the leg kicks are coming. They're coming from an opposite stance. That's going to make them terribly effective. I've got to figure out a way to answer for it. I got to figure out a way to make this work. I got to figure out a way to make him pay for what is probably his best weapon, right? And so it's exactly what he did. You're going to constantly see him answer for that left hand through the leg kicks. You're going to constantly see him use his good footwork. You're going to constantly see him throw 4, 5, 6 strike combinations. You're going to constantly see him force that shelling again that you see from Eddie Alvarez, albeit from a different reason. And of course, ultimately, he just kept doing it, set up the jab at the end, right, at the final sequence, and then with a bit of a delay timing by throwing the right and then finishing off with the left, caught him absolutely clean, and then, of course, put him away from there. So 2 very different approaches, 2 totally different stances, 2 very different fighters, both of which able to get the job done within relatively similar time frames, too, here, keep in mind. Right? Eddie Alvarez won just at the end of the 3rd round, Dustin Poirier winning right at the beginning of the 4th round. Is there some kind of reason why it happened in that way? I don't know. Maybe something to keep an eye on as Justin Gaethje's career continues. Are there any other lessons we can draw here? I think we can. Here's one big lesson. Has the Gaethje code been cracked? I'm a little hesitant to say that because you have to be Dustin Poirier talented and Dustin Poirier tough, or Eddie Alvarez talented or Eddie Alvarez tough to beat him. It's one thing to show you the best rounds and the most meaningful offense from these guys, but they took hellacious beatings too. Look at the face of Eddie Alvarez. It was all swollen. Dustin Poirier has posted a video of his leg. It's completely jacked, right? So it's not like these guys just followed a simple game plan and executed it and they were all fine. You're going to take a serious beating, and I don't really know how many guys can stand up to that. But what we have seen now is something from Justin Gaethje that I think any opponent, no matter if they're orthodox and they want to follow Eddie's game plan, or southpaw and they want to follow Dustin's, what I do see from Justin Gaethje, from that Alvarez to the Poirier fight, as I mentioned, he has added some tools. For example, right, as I noted before, he was only throwing rear leg kicks from the Eddie Alvarez fight. In the Poirier fight, he threw rear leg kicks and front leg kicks, so he was really diversifying that a little bit. In other words, he added tools between fights. Here's what I don't see, at least not a ton of it. Now, maybe his coach can speak better to that. I don't know. I'm only giving you broad, basic overviews. I don't see a lot of adjustment from him. I see a lot of reaction from him and a lot of him sticking to his strengths. Remember, look at his style. He's willing to literally, mathematically provable way, take more than he gives, right? He just kind of sticks to what he knows. He can add things in between fights, but in the middle of a fight, if you've got a game plan and you kind of stick to it, I don't see him really adjusting a whole lot around that. He continually shells to the point where against Alvarez, it cost him. He shelled in this fight a lot too, and that wasn't the reason he lost the fight, but it was a big contributor to all the damage he ultimately accepted. Those leg kicks were a big portion of his offense, but they're the main reason why he got countered and lost. In other words, that left hand from Poirier, when it landed in the 4th, that wasn't the first time. I just showed you the first round. He was landing that over and over and over and over again, and there was no real adjustment in the setup for how he threw that. Again, he did add some dynamism with the front leg kick, but you get the idea. There just wasn't a whole lot of adaptation. He just kind of rolls in there with what he has and then lets the chips fall where they may, and maybe he's happy with that, in which case, hey, I mean, we can't complain about not being entertained and not being enthralled by his career. None of us can say that. But nevertheless, you do have to worry. He did beat Michael Johnson, but he came perilously close to losing. He lost to Eddie Alvarez, and he lost to Dustin Poirier. Now, there's no shame in losing to either of those guys. Eddie Alvarez, one of the best lightweights ever. Dustin Poirier, at 29, he's now peaking. We can have so many nice things to say about Justin Gaethje. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm a little bit worried about, number one, we only talk about, well, how much damage has he taken? How much damage has he taken? That's obviously a very key consideration. The other one for me is that I don't see a lot of adjustments and reads being made to tailor towards an opponent. Eddie Alvarez won because he tailored his offense to an opponent. Dustin Poirier won because he tailored his offense to an opponent. I think you can say Justin Gaethje beat Michael Johnson just because that style he has works. But I don't see enough adaptation and change fight over fight. Maybe your response is, we don't want to see that change. We don't want to see adaptation. We just want to see the Justin Gaethje we know. Hey, fair enough. But as long as he keeps fighting top lightweights, and maybe he'll have a bit of a slide back following 2 losses, this won't be as relevant a concern. But again, not everyone can stand up to that onslaught, but it's pretty clear if you can find an opening in his game, you can just keep pursuing it without a whole lot of concern for him taking that away. That's the opposite of a Floyd Mayweather. That's the opposite of a Max Holloway. It's a little bit troubling for me when I see that, because he is so talented, he can do so many things, but it's just metaphorically speaking, it's just one line that he walks over and over again. So something to keep in mind for future fights. One last note, I did a post-fight special on my personal YouTube channel. I'll put that up at the top of the screen so you can see that if you want. I want to make a note about the Arjan Bhullar omoplata, if I can. And I'm not going to look at the footage here because I'm trying to keep these a little bit shorter these days. I don't want to just do every podcast where we're talking about big picture stuff, strategy, and tactics. I want us to an extent, when we can, get back into the weeds a little bit about specific technical applications of things. But I want you to go back, and I want to encourage you to watch the Arjan Bhullar fight against, please forgive my pronunciation, Vizorchik. I can't pronounce it properly. But in any case, what you notice from Bhullar was, I mentioned it on my post-fight show, you can pass guard on your knees, but it's very difficult. If you really want to pass guard, you got to be on your feet. There are some exceptions to that. Some people can pass on their knees. Certain passes work really well on your knees. But by and large, you got to be either standing or at least have your feet up. You could be bent over at the waist. You can be squatting. There's lots of different ways you can do it, but you got to be on your feet a little bit. Arjan Bhullar in that first round never ever once got on his feet once he was in guard, which was a bit of a bad sign for me. And the second one is about the omoplata, only the second ever omoplata finish. Let me be clear about this. If you're fighting at the UFC level, there are going to be exceptions, of course, but there's a reason why there's only been 2 omoplatas. You should not be losing to omoplatas in the UFC, and I'm sure that Bhullar was caught off guard by a heavyweight even attempting it, but there were some red flags that happened there, and I want to be clear, this is not some podcast where somebody just tells fighters what they should be doing better, because that's not my position. I'm not a coach. I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy watching tape, observing things for all the things that presents in terms of the good and the bad. There's limits to this analysis. There's limits to the value of the analysis, and all that should be kept in mind. However, there's a reason why that submission is so rare, right? The reason why is because the setup to it is typically slow. There's a lot of evasive maneuvers, and it's easy to see coming, at least in MMA. That's really the answer. Now, I've often said this. Once a submission is locked on, you have to respect it. It doesn't matter if a white belt put it on you. It doesn't matter if it got there by accident. It doesn't matter if it's unorthodox. If it's on there, you have to respect it, okay? So people are like, well, you can't just not tap to that. Of course you can't. If it's on there, it's on there, and that's just the fact of the matter. The major issue for me was the posture of Arjan Bhullar. He didn't have live toes. Try standing up with your instep, the top of your feet touching the ground, right? As I explained on Saturday night, if I take my hand and I use the back of my hand to push, how strong is that? It's not very strong. But if I twist over and use the bottom of my hands and now I push, it becomes a significantly stronger thing. Try standing with your insteps touching the ground, the tops of your feet all the way over, versus putting your toes on the ground, where they're supposed to be, and then firing up to your feet. You'll see it's a lot easier. You're a lot more mobile. There's a lot more you can do with that. That's one problem. The second problem is if I stack my rear end to my heels with live toes, it's going to be virtually impossible for any heavyweight to be omoplated, right? Because you're ramrod straight. They would have to come up underneath and get it. And even then, because you have live toes, you can pop to your feet and circle out. It'd be very, very easy to get rid of it. He wasn't doing that. He was bent over at the waist. And when you're bent over at the waist, so you got your elbows on the ground and your knees on the ground, or hands on the ground and knees on the ground, you literally create the 90-degree angle for any fighter to get that. They just have to push the head away and slide around. And even then, when they do that, if you feel it coming around, you have a couple of options. You can roll, which should be very, very quick if you feel it coming. It's sort of a timing issue. And the other one is you could see Bhullar move into Vizorchik, whatever, and then he doesn't stand. If you just stand, that goes away, and he doesn't. He decides to go back parallel to him and then roll. And at that point, the arm comes over the top, and that stops the roll. It's called a seatbelt. Just not great. just not great. I'm not sure what else to say about it. But whenever somebody gets caught in an unorthodox submission, it's always worth examining why, what it means, and what it says. Does this mean that Arjan Bhullar can't dramatically improve this and become a great heavyweight? Of course not. Doesn't mean that at all. Does it mean he's not an intriguing prospect anymore? Doesn't mean that at all. Does it mean that we shouldn't care about his career anymore? It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean that if you were in that first round, not even attempting to pass guard by being on your knees the whole time, and then you get caught in a submission like that, it's probably evidence that there's a lot of work that has to happen in the gym before he can be ready for the rest of that division. I think that's pretty fair. And last but not least, we take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. By the way, there is a really good LFA event on Friday that you should check out on Access TV. But the big one, of course, the weekend, UFC Atlantic City, which will take place at Boardwalk Hall. Man, the UFC used to go to Boardwalk Hall frequently back when the UFC was like at sub-UFC 40 numbers. You can go back and see a lot of them there. They even went to one of Trump's old places. They used to go to Atlantic City a lot, and back when Atlantic City was a lot different. But interesting to see Boardwalk Hall in there. Been a while. In the main event, Edson Barboza takes on Kevin Lee. Frankie Edgar will face Cub Swanson. Very, very risky fight for both those guys. Chase Sherman takes on Justin Willis. David Branch versus Thiago Santos. Aljamain Sterling versus Brett Johns. Jim Miller versus Dan Hooker. That's your main card. On the prelim card, Ryan LaFleur takes on Alex Garcia. Magomed Babulatov, one of Ramzan Kadyrov's guys, takes on Ulka Sasaki. CR Bahadurazada takes on Luan Chagas. Corey Anderson versus Patrick Cummings. And then on Fight Pass, Leslie Smith versus Aspen Ladd. Merab Devalishvili takes on Ricky Simon. And then Tony Martin versus Kaita Nakamura. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, just shoot me an email, lukethomasnews@gmail.com. Appreciate you guys watching. And until next time, enjoy the fights.